This is the tutorial for sewing this feminine and elegant top. With delicate straps, a beautiful yet modest neckline, a fitted cinch waist, and a softly curved hem. Each detail adds a little extra femininity to the design. You can now get the PDF pattern for this top in my Etsy shop. It includes a written instruction to pair with this video. The link is in the description box. First, before you print out all of the pattern pieces, remember to print the first page and use a ruler to check the dimensions of these test squares. If everything matches up, you can now print out the rest of the pages and begin to assemble them. Then cut all the pieces out. You'll get 5 of them. Next, place the patterns onto the folded fabric, following the grain line. For the strap piece, you want to cut it on the bias, meaning 40-degree angle. After cutting, you get 1 front piece, 2 back pieces, 1 front facing, 2 back facings, and 2 strips for making the straps. Then go ahead and transfer all the darts onto the fabric. You can do whatever you're most comfortable with, but this is how I normally do it. First, I pin all the important points of the darts. Then I flip the fabric and use a marker to simply put a dot where a pin is. Next, I flip it back and do the same thing for this side. I slowly lift up the pattern and remove the pins as I go. This is very important. You can see here I accidentally lift up a pin before I transfer it onto the fabric. If this happens, just pin the paper down and do it again. Then connect all the points and you get accurate darts on fabric. Now, one more thing. At the end of these waist darts, draw a straight line down to the hem, because rather than stop the darts at somewhere in the middle of the top, we extend the dart and sew this line and create a straight line running down. Now that we're done with the cutting and transferring, let's get to the actual sewing. First, you Staystitch the necklines and the armholes. Doing this helps stabilize the curves and prevent stretching of these curves while you handle the garment in later steps. You simply sew about 5 mm away from the raw edge so it stays in the zone of the seam allowance, which is 1 cm by the way for all the curves in my patterns. Once you're done, let's move on to darts. I usually don't pin my darts before sewing, I just fold it in half and sew, but since I've learned a new way to sew darts that ensures better precision, I want to share it with you. First, with the fabric laying flat, pin the 2 dart legs together, then fold the dart in half and change the direction of the pins. Now I just go in and sew from the top to the bottom of the waist darts. When I almost approach the end of the dart, instead of just sewing off the dart to finish it, I gradually steer my stitch and sew straight down to the hem, just about 2 mm away from the folded edge. The darts are gonna look like this from the right side, straight down to the hem. For the bust darts, just sew them as you normally do. You can also use the pinning tips I showed you earlier. Remember to leave long thread tails to make some knots later. Once everything is done, press the darts. For the bust darts, you can press it up or down. It's up to you. Here I press the bust darts down. For the waist darts, this is a pro tip that I learned from my sewing instructor. In order for the waist dart to look nice on clothes, you want to stretch this part of the darts out a bit. To do this, you want to put the iron on the middle of the dart and use the other hand to kind of move the fabric in towards you. Steam iron if you can. Then I flip to the right side and press the waist dart toward the center. This step will be much easier thanks to the tip I showed you earlier, and the waist dart looks way nicer than if you don't apply the tip. Next, I go ahead and overlock the center back seams and all the side seams of both front and back pieces. For the facing, overlock these sides. If you don't have an overlocker, you can use the zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. Now move on to the straps. Grab one of these. You only need one even though we cut two of them. Fold it in half and sew with 7 cm seam allowance from the folded edge, which is the exact distance from the needle of my sewing machine to one edge of my presser foot. Flip it and give it a nice press. Cut it into 2 strings like so. Each is 5 cm in length. Grab your front piece on the right side, put each string in the center of each side of the shoulders and slightly tilt it toward the neckline. Then grab your hand needle and do some stitches to fix the strings in place for easier sewing later. Next, grab your front facing, right sides together, put it on the main front piece like so. We're gonna sew one long stitch from here to here, so use pins to fix it in place. Also for this part, I recommend drawing 1 cm seam allowance so you know when to pivot the stitching when I broach this part. A little side note, if your string is for some reason bigger or smaller than 7 mm, try to draw a 1 cm seam allowance and then adjust according to your string width. Use your finger to feel where your string is underneath and redraw the seam allowance. For the tops, I still keep the 1 cm seam allowance. Now sew using 1 cm seam allowance guide on your sewing machine. Try not to sew onto the string. As you get to the corner, you can use the hand wheel to make one stitch at a time for better precision, and then pivot and continue sewing. Right after sewing, I recommend you pull out the string to see if everything is okay. If the strings get stuck because you accidentally sew on them, just unpick the wrong part and restitch it. I also recommend do a second stitch to reinforce the stitching for this part here, because later we're gonna cut very close to the stitching, making it very prone to fraying. Once everything turns out okay, I trim off some excess seam allowance like so. Do some snips into, but not through, the seam allowance along the armholes and neckline to release the tension. and then flip it all out. Next, I'm going to understitch the neckline in the armholes. This helps the facing stay flat and prevents it from rolling to the right side when you wear the garment. And to do this, press the seam allowance toward the facing, then stitch on the facing side, close to the seam, about 2 mm away from the original stitch line. As you sew, gently pull the fabric so it stays flat and smooth. Take your time here. You won't be able to sew all the way from one armhole to the other in one go. Just understitch as far as you can, break it into 3 sections like this, and don't forget to backstitch at the start and end of each section. Give it a nice press and this is what you get. Now let's sew the zipper on. The zipper is going to be attached at the center back, with the opening being at the hem. The zipper is going to run from the hem to somewhere mid-armhole, so just mark that point. Put 2 back pieces right sides together and sew a straight stitch down with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Next, this is how I put the zipper on. One side of the zipper has zipper teeth and the other side is smooth. The smooth side is the right side of the zipper. You want to put the right side of it onto the right side of the fabric, like so. Do you see this little plastic piece? I'm gonna position it 1 cm above the hemline and sew straight down, past the slit about 2 to 3 cm. This only acts as a placing stitch, so don't stress over it too much. Then pull the zipper up and sew the other side. I recommend using pins so the 2 sides of the zipper line up perfectly. Next, slide the zipper down. When it nearly gets to the end, flip to the wrong side. Use this tiny little handle to apply some force onto the slider to get it past the slit. Now grab your invisible zipper foot and sew as close to the zipper teeth as possible. If you're using a similar foot like mine, my tip to sew a beautiful zipper is to flatten out the zipper teeth as you sew to help the needle get close to the teeth. I have a zipper tutorial, check it out if you need it. When you get to the slit, adjust the fabric and continue sewing past the slit for about 2 to 3 cm and then backstitch. Do the same for the other side. Finally, cut off the extra zipper, leaving a tail about 3 to 4 cm. Give the zipper a nice press. And this is what you get. Now let's sew the back facings together, right sides facing each other, sew straight with 1.5 cm seam allowance, and then press the seam open. Now let's attach the front to the back. On the right side of the back piece, place the right side of the front piece on top. Position the strap so it stays right at the middle of the shoulders. Do a little hand stitching here to fix them in place. Then put the back facings we have combined on top of them all. Draw the seam allowance for the top part to make it easier for us later, and basically redo all the steps we did for the front piece. Next, we're gonna sew the side seams. Right sides together, flip the facings up, make sure to use pins so everything aligned perfectly, and sew using a 1.5 cm seam allowance. At this point, I recommend trying the top on to see if it fits you and make any adjustment if needed. If the fit turns out okay, now go and press the side seams. Now we're gonna attach the facings to the main fabric so they don't flap around when you wear the garment. To do this, on the wrong side of the garment, I sew the facing to the seam allowance of the side seam, like so, and repeat for the other side. Now all that's left to do is to finish the hemline. First, I cut off some extra length of the zipper and even out the seams. Next, I go ahead and cut off any zipper teeth below this tiny plastic piece so it's easier to fold up the hemline later. Do it carefully so you don't accidentally cut into the fabric. Then go ahead and overlock the hemline. Next, add a zipper tail. I fold the hem up 1 cm and do some hand stitching and fix it in place. Do the same thing for the other side. Once you're done, fold and press the hem up for 1 cm all around. Remember to be mindful of the curve. After pressing, you might got something like this. Finally, sew to fix the hem in place. I do it on the right side of the garment, but if you are new to sewing, you might find it easier to sew on the wrong side. Give the hem and everything a final press, and there you have it.